This presentation is about some of my work in progress, both my kind of personal research around yoga as well as my professional research around yoga in my role as an Associate Professor of American Studies at the University of Maine at Augusta, and also related to my work as a fitness and yoga instructor at the Bangor YMCA. This is from a presentation that I did for Caring Connections in relationship to the Bangor YMCA, but I also wanted to make it available to my larger yoga community for those of you who are interested in these ideas. So if you're familiar with my yoga classes, you know that I make a lot of connections between the mind and the body and between breath and movement. And so this is looking a little bit more closely at some of these things if you're interested. So first, looking at the larger cultural context for what we're talking about and why we do yoga in the first place. And part of that is the toxic environment that we live in, the physical world in terms of the chemicals and the toxins that we come in contact with, the processed foods that we eat, even if we try to avoid these kinds of things. Also just the constant onslaught of information that we have every time we go online or we check Facebook, or just the amount of time that we spend on our screens with this onslaught of information and how much screen time we have prior to the world of COVID-19, and especially now when we're spending so much more time on our devices just as a daily need. And then also in terms of our culture, some of these toxic ideas that we live by, including valuing the individual over community often. In terms of the world of working out and fitness, we often have this kind of no pain, no gain mentality and really prioritize really hard, intense workouts over workouts that might be more restful or just over getting rest. A lot of people approach yoga as a workout, which is not a bad thing. It certainly is a workout, and different kinds of yoga are more of a workout than others. But yoga is a lot wider than that as well. And the impacts that we can get from yoga are really diverse. And then also the way in which we often overproduce and the way that we're pushed to overproduce and be productive in our lives, and valuing productivity over pleasure in terms of the activities that we engage in. I think a lot of people who are working from home these days are feeling stressed for a variety of reasons. And part of that is that need to still be productive during this time when there's so much stress and so many trauma responses that are going on. So part of what I want us to think about is that what we take into our minds might be just as important as what we take into our bodies. And this is more than just about positive thinking or mindfulness, which are both really great things in and of themselves. But I do want to make clear here that what I'm not suggesting in this PowerPoint in any way, shape, or form is the idea that positive thinking is some kind of magical cure-all, or that positive thinking is the reason why we may be sick or not sick, for instance. Positive thinking certainly can make a positive impact on our physical well-being, which is part of the point that I'm making here. But for instance, the arguments that we can, make a vision board and put up a picture of a hot guy and a great car and a big house and positively think those things into existence is extremely problematic and moves into the kind of thinking where we blame people for their circumstances instead of looking at those larger systems. So this is kind of another related topic that I'm not focusing on here in this PowerPoint, but something that I do talk a lot about in my academic work. So what happens to our bodies and our minds, and what impacts our bodies impacts our minds, and vice versa? What impacts our bodies impacts our minds. So we see this a lot in trauma and PTSD, for instance, and I'm going to come back to that idea in a moment in terms of the parasympathetic nervous system and the ways in which people who suffer from PTSD might experience this flight, fight, or freeze response. And that what research has found is that trauma is not just something that happens in the mind, but something that is held in the body as well. And a lot of new research and a lot of kind of classic texts like this one that I have here on the right side of the screen, The Body Keeps the Score, where we look at the ways in which trauma is held in the body and the ways in which standard therapy that only treats the mind or only does kind of talk therapy really can't get at the core of trauma, because it is something that we hold on to quite literally in our bodies. So the connection between the mind and the body is quite profound and powerful. And so we can't heal the body without addressing the mind, and we can't heal the mind without addressing the body. And part of the reason why is because our brain connects the mind and the body. So several sources that I'm working with here in this PowerPoint, and one of these is this beautiful book, Science of Yoga. There's several books actually that have that title, so the picture here can lead you to it if you are interested in it. And also these illustrations that you see here kind of give you an idea of what's inside the book. So the book has these really amazing illustrations and is packed with information about the illustrations, about all of the different systems within the body, but then also specifically about different yoga poses. So like the picture here of tree pose, where we see this illustration of the muscles that are being activated in the different poses. And again, a lot of information, a lot of really interesting information about the body and yoga, and then the body and the mind in relationship to yoga. Here, looking at this quote from the book, enhancing your mind-body and your body-mind connection increases our ability to self-regulate and improves your resilience. So this idea that if we learn certain kinds of tools, we can help to be more resilient in our bodies and our minds and to regulate some of these systems that are often on automatic. So one caveat here to say in terms of my background coming to this PowerPoint presentation is that I'm definitely not a scientist, never have been, but I do love science and science fiction and the possibilities of connecting science to the kinds of work that I do in cultural studies. So I'm an interdisciplinary scholar. A lot of the work I do is critical and creative approaches in the fields of American studies and women and gender studies. I look at social and cultural contexts and texts and stories and movements. I'm a cultural critic, not a neuroscientist, but my work is moving in these new kinds of directions in terms of these interdisciplinary connections. On the right-hand side, you can see my books that I have published, and you can see that obviously women in fitness and American culture has a close relationship, but my other books might not seem to be so related, even though I do talk about self-care and activism in my Girls on Fire books, for instance. I also have a RYT 200 yoga certification, and I'm working on a specialty track in terms of PTSD and trauma-informed yoga. And I do a lot of self-study, reading and experimenting in terms of my own embodied practice. So that's where I'm coming from, and I have some really great sources where a lot of this information is coming specifically from, and I note that both in the text on the PowerPoint and in my talking about it as well. Yoga for Emotional Balance by Bo Forbes is a really great book, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in these issues. She talks a lot about depression and anxiety and emotional balance and the ways in which yoga, and specifically restorative yoga and breathing techniques, can help to bring us into greater emotional balance. Another great book that one of my yoga participants shared with me is The Healing Power of Breath: Simple Techniques to Reduce Stress and Anxiety, Enhance Concentration, and Balance Your Emotions. So what I'm talking about in this PowerPoint comes a lot from these sources and my training in Yoga Fit as well. So looking at this concept of neuroplasticity, and I'm sure you've probably heard this word before. A few years back it was trending a lot, lots of different luminosity commercials and things like that, that really were looking at these different brain games and this importance of building neuroplasticity. And for a long time, science thought that the brain just was formed when we were born and that it never changed or developed except to deteriorate as we aged, which is, of course, a super depressing idea that we're born with this new, fresh brain and it just goes downhill from there. But research now shows that that's really not the case, and that we can, throughout our entire lifespan, continue to build new pathways in our brains, new neural pathways in our brains. And so this is part of what neuroplasticity is about. And really anything that we do to exercise our brain helps to build neuroplasticity. But the real power here that I'm talking about in this presentation is about yoga and dance, and specifically about breathing and mindful movement. So we get really locked into these patterns of movement and these patterns of thought, both, again, like literally in terms of the physical activities that we do. Like if we think about running, it's that very linear, one foot in front of the other, always those same muscles engaged in that movement. And so doing novel movement or new movements that our body is not used to, interrupting that muscle memory a little bit, is really quite literally creating new neural networks and new pathways in the brain. So part of all of this is that we can actually change our brains via our bodies, and we can actually change our bodies via our brains. Again, no magical solution here. So throughout this PowerPoint, I have some different stress and anxiety busters, some different activities that you can do. And so this one is just to move. Put on some of your favorite music and move. You're in your house, no one's watching, no reason to be self-conscious, just moving to the beat and enjoying that movement. Or if you need a little bit more of a prompt, you can do what a lot of us call dance the body. And so you can dance the different parts of your body from the head to the toes to the head. And again, really no wrong way to do this. And a song, if you want to, Florence and the Machine, Shake It Out, is a nice one to kind of shake off that tension and stress, but really any song that you love. And looking at some of the research that we have done about the brain and about dancing, some interesting studies that look at how dance actually can help to prevent diseases like dementia by up to 76% more than perhaps reading. So for instance, this meme that was circulating for a little while looks at some of the results from this study and some of the ways in which we might help to reduce the risk of dementia. And so a lot of people might think, doing crossword puzzles, which sure is great, and reading, but that activities like bicycling, swimming, or playing golf, for instance, did not do anything to reduce the risk of dementia. But dance actually had really great results, and some of those results are here on this chart, and some of them are the same as other kinds of exercise, of course, strengthening bones and boosting cardiovascular health, and flexibility and strength and balance and endurance, but also then looking at increasing our mental capacity, exercising our cognitive processes, and looking at, again, creating those new neural paths. So part of this is also about tapping into our nervous system. So we can look at the central nervous system, which you can see pictured here along the spine, traveling up and down the spine to our brain, the peripheral nervous system that reaches out into the body and sends messages back to the brain this way. But we're really concerned here with the autonomic nervous system, which is often referred to as the body's autopilot. So this is the part of our body that controls the functions that we don't have to think about. So breathing and our heart, for instance, we don't have to tell our body to breathe, it does it for us. We don't have to tell our heart to beat, our body does that for us, our brain does that for us. So connected to this is the sympathetic nervous system, which is often referred to as the stress response system and the fight or flight or freeze response. And so a lot of times, like especially if we experience trauma or any forms of trauma, the sympathetic nervous system might be in overdrive. It might be functioning so much that it kind of loses track of the real dangers that it's designed to interfere in for us. And so this parasympathetic nervous system, if we can tap into that system, the relaxation response, the rest and digest part of our nervous system, then we can really start to bring that sympathetic nervous system back into balance. So that's part of what we're looking at here. Connected to this is the vagus nerve, this was one of the coolest things when I first learned about this in one of Bo Forbes' workshops, also known as the wandering nerve. And I love that name for the vagus nerve. And you can kind of see from this illustration here the way in which the vagus nerve wanders throughout our body, connecting into all of these different systems. The only cranial nerve to leave the head and the neck area, and 80% of the vagus nerve's fibers are sending signals from the body to the brain. So by tapping into this part of our nervous system, we can do that via breath and via different myofascial release techniques that are done with tennis balls, for instance. And we can again start to calm, can go back to that idea of rest and digest, can trigger that relaxation response, and again bring more balance to that stress response. Part of this is in the power of the breath, and I mentioned the source, the transformative power of the breath, where they talk about a variety of different studies that reveal that by changing our patterns of breathing, again something that our body does automatically for us, it's possible to restore balance to stress response systems, like I just said, to calm an agitated mind, to relieve symptoms of anxiety and PTSD, to improve physical health and endurance, elevate performance, whether that's athletic performance or other kinds of performance, work performance, musical performance, and then even also enhance our relationships. So that book talks a lot about all of these different impacts that the breath and the changing patterns of the breath can have, and also talks a lot about first responders and victims of mass tragedies and the ways in which breath can help those people, both the responders and the victims. So the second stress and anxiety buster here is just to breathe. And I've got a video on my YouTube channel, Mind Body Fitness, or I should know the name of my YouTube channel, and also on the YMCA website. And just breathing through the nose, in through the nose, out through the nose, and just focusing on that breath, in and out with that breath, and just seeing the difference that that might make for you. And you can start to slowly extend the inhale and the exhale, and maybe even then gradually extend the exhale so that it lasts longer than the inhale, and really start to notice your anxiety melt away. When I was giving this presentation, one of the people who I designed the videos for so that she tried it out, and she was actually really, really surprised that the breathing techniques did make a big difference in how she felt, how she didn't even realize how anxious she was feeling, and that she really noticed that change that came from those breathing techniques. So I hope that you'll try it out and see how that works for you. Yoga for Every Mind Body is the YouTube channel. So another thing that Bo Forbes talks about is restorative yoga, and the way in which we can use restorative yoga to have more rest and relaxation, which is different than the rest and relaxation that we might get when we're sleeping. And so she asks questions about support, and that is both literal support but also more figurative as well. So in restorative yoga, it's yoga that's done, it's really relaxing, and there's a lot of blankets and pillows and props that put you into positions where you can relax the body, relax the mind, and breathe, and see what happens from that toward emotional well-being. So asking, again, literally about support, but also figuratively, what do support and sustenance mean to you? How would it feel to allow someone or something to support you? What would it be like if you consistently nurtured yourself? Restorative yoga asks that you commit to the lost art of self-care. Comfort and self-care are essential to truly support your emotional well-being, and also add the support that your body asks for. So when you're doing these restorative yoga poses, a couple of which I'll show you here, you want to, again, listen to your body. You want to listen to your body in all cases, in life and in fitness, and especially in yoga classes, and try to give the body what it asks for. So stress and anxiety buster number 3 is just this legs up the wall pose. This can also be done as what I refer to as a simple inversion, so you don't even need the wall necessarily, but the wall gives that extra layer of support. And you can see from this picture here on the left that this is more of the restorative yoga pose, lots of different props happening here, the strap around the legs, the weight on the wrists, but really key here is the blanket underneath the head and neck for support, and then the blanket underneath the low back. So again, you want to find what works for you. I was trying this pose out last night actually, and I found that I didn't want so much support underneath my low back, and actually made that much smaller for myself. But again, play with these things and see how it feels for you. And some of those legs up the wall benefits, for instance, helping thyroid function, countering insomnia, relieving back pain, relieving anxiety, helping with migraines, improving posture, adjusting the spine naturally, improving digestion, so many benefits, again, to something that's rather simple. Put your legs up the wall, scoot close to the wall, turn, bring your legs up the wall like you're sitting on the wall, and breathe. So all of this is also connected to anxiety and depression, and of course, this quote and meme that I have here is not so easy, but I think it's a really interesting concept in terms of thinking about how our thought patterns impact our mood. And so generally, if you think about living in the past, you might tend to have more depression. If you're thinking about the future, you're going to be more anxious. And if you're living in the present, that's where you're at peace. And so one of the things that yoga tries to do is to help us to live in the present, to be mindful in the present, to not worry about the past, to not worry about the future, but to settle in and be present with yourself on your yoga mat. And so, again, not so easy as some kind of simple cure, like stop thinking about the past and your depression goes away. Not so easy. But again, interesting to kind of think about this quote and how you think it might relate to you. And also thinking a little bit about depression and anxiety, like before I started looking into this research, I would have thought that these, they're such seemingly opposite things, and I would have thought, these are opposite things. They certainly don't have a relationship to each other, and you certainly can't be depressed and anxious at the same time, which is absolutely not true. So just this illustration that I pulled off the internet looks a little bit at different symptoms of anxiety and depression, but then also those that are shared between them. But again, these can be things that shift from moment to moment, day to day, but also things that are patterns that get established in our minds and our bodies. And further, as Bo Forbes writes about in her book, we have anxiety and depression that are both on a spectrum, so they can vary a lot in terms of how intense those symptoms are, in terms of how we experience them. But at the same time, we can be experiencing anxiety and depression, and so we might find that, again, we've got that connection with the mind and the body. So when we're experiencing anxiety and depression, that's not just happening in the mind, but also in the body. And it might be that we are anxious in the body and anxious in the mind, or that we're depressed in the body and depressed in the mind. But it can also be mixed, and again, along that spectrum, but we can be anxious in the body and depressed in the mind, or depressed in the body and anxious in the mind. And so restorative yoga and breathing is one thing that, or two things, that address this, again, anxiety and depression in the mind and the body, and the different ways that it can exist in both of those places in different ways. So again, there are no miracle cures in any of this. And so when we're looking at anxiety and depression, we are looking at patterns of thought and habits of the body that have been deeply ingrained over time. And we live those patterns over and over and over again. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out how to break those patterns and how to break away from them. These are long-standing patterns in the brain, the mind, and the body. And so it really takes diligent practice to create lasting change. So it's not like, oh, I put my legs up the wall, boom, I'm cured, let's go forward. But it's something that we really have to commit to doing every day in some way, shape, or form, even if that's just a simple breathing exercise when we get stressed out, or really committing to our own personal yoga practice that we develop ourselves or in conjunction with someone in the field of yoga therapy or a knowledgeable yoga teacher. So when we look at, again, the ways in which the mind and the body are connected, and we can see the kind of the physical impacts of repetitive movements causing injury or poor posture accumulating over time, or this picture that just kills me to look at over here on the left of what's happening to us when we're constantly looking down at those devices all the time, and the way that it literally changes the structure of our bodies. And that impact that the physical change, accumulation and change in these patterns can have on our emotions. So this picture here, illustrating this forward sloping posture that is then also connected to depression. So again, not so very simple that if we just improve our posture, we improve our mood, but actually can be that magical sometimes, that if we change that physical posture, we can notice differences almost immediately sometimes in our mental condition as well. If you try these things out and you don't notice a change right away, that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that, again, some patterns are so deeply ingrained that we have to really work at them to change them. Same goes in terms of those patterns in the brain. Like if we have these repeating scripts where we're mentally beating ourselves up with our negative thoughts, we have these certain stories about ourselves that we tell about who we are and what we desire, what we can do and what we can't do, and we play those out over and over and over again. Like often I like to think about like, when I'm getting into that mode and I'm having like a little pity party for myself. Again, that's not a bad thing. Like we do that. We're human beings. But when we keep feeding into these same kind of negative thought patterns and we don't have a way to break those thought patterns, again, it messes with us mentally, but it also impacts our bodies. So for instance, if we've got that spinning mind in yoga, what we call monkey mind, that mind that, everything's going all the time and we never stop thinking, that is also impacting our physical bodies. So that might increase the rate of our breath, increase our heart rate, and that can, again, impact us in a variety of ways. So again, those mental patterns impact our physical conditions, just like those physical conditions impact our mental patterns. So one of the ways that we can start to intervene in this is just in the power of noticing. So in yoga we say, for instance, we want to notice as a witness, but not as a judge. Or in my work in cultural theory, I like to think about as an observer, but not a critic. So whatever metaphor works for you there. So we notice these things, right? And really once we start to notice these things and we bring attention to our breath or our posture, for instance, we're already changing it. So you might have noticed that when I started talking about breathing, maybe you noticed like, how am I breathing? Or when I started talking about posture, maybe you sat up a little bit straighter and thought about your posture. Maybe not. But again, when we start to notice that, we do start to change it already. And also a lot in Bo Forbes' work and in other places in terms of thinking about yoga is this term and this concept of interoception. So another term, proprioception, is about really noticing like the physical outward movements of our bodies and being aware of those. But this goes deeper, literally and figuratively, into our internal body awareness. So really being able to tune in and to listen to our bodies and to see how we feel, to notice our heart rate, to notice our breath. Are we keeping our breath up into the very upper parts of our chest and our lungs? The lungs are really huge organs, and so if we keep that breath in just that part of our lungs, we're really missing out on that full effect of a full breath. If we're not breathing in through the nose, out through the nose, if we're breathing through the mouth, we might start to tend to get these quick, shallow breaths, and these quick, shallow breaths are very much connected to anxiety. So again, impacting the way that we breathe impacts the way that we feel. And as we start to notice those things, we can start to change those things in these very simple little ways that can have a greater impact. As Bo Forbes notes, the more awareness you build in your mind and your body, and the more you inhabit your body, the better you'll be able to discern and honor what works best for you. So these are all tools that we have. And Bo Forbes does this idea of a 5-minute check-in. There's a lot of different versions of this check-in and the questions that you can ask yourself. But this is a check-in that you can do with yourself anytime. You can do this before you do a yoga practice, or before you go for a walk, or before you talk to your boss about something that's stressful to you, or whatever that might be that you want to note, kind of looking at your mind and your body as a self-experiment. And so we might ask the questions about the rate of our breathing. What's the rate of my breathing? Is my breathing fast? Is it shallow? Is it deeper? Is it slower? And again, not as a judge, but as a witness. What's the speed of my mind? Are there a million thoughts bouncing all over the place? Is that monkey going crazy in my head? Or are my thoughts slower? Am I having trouble putting my thoughts together? What's my energy level? Am I tired and lethargic, or am I kind of wired and shaky? Again, noticing these things, and also noticing, am I in the moment? Am I thinking about what happened yesterday, this thing that I'm upset about? Or am I thinking about what I have to get at the grocery store when I go there later this week? Am I here in the moment? And the one that's a little bit more challenging is the question of am I in my body? So for instance, when we experience any variety of trauma, we might dissociate from our bodies. If we're in physical pain, we might be more outside of our bodies so that we are less present with that pain. And this is something that's hard to kind of learn and observe. And again, this way of checking in, and you can do the check-in before and after something and see how you feel. And so in all of this, there is the power of yoga. And it's not so much what kind of yoga, but how we're practicing yoga. So like I mentioned earlier, yoga can be a super intense workout, It can be just that workout if we're not connecting and we're not noticing our breath and we're not looking for those other kinds of elements. So with yoga and the power of yoga, we're looking for mindful movement. We're looking for noticing the movement, being present in the moment of coordinating breath and movement. So inhaling the arms up, exhaling the arms down, for instance. Not trying to push our bodies into the places that they're not ready to go. In my classes, I often say, if this feels good, do this. Take another option if you would like another option. If you don't want to do something, don't do it. If something hurts, don't do it. It's a great lesson for yoga, and it's a great lesson for life as well. And then also settling into stillness and comfort and ease and giving ourselves permission to stop and breathe and just lay on the yoga mat and breathe, for instance, without feeling that we're not accomplishing the things that we need to accomplish. So generally, and again, these are generalizations, but they do ring true, that generally forward-folding kinds of yoga poses reduce anxiety. They slow the heart rate and they calm the brain. And again, here you can see these illustrations of restorative yoga poses where you can have as many blankets or pillows to prop yourself into a very comfortable position where the body doesn't have to struggle or strain or stretch. It just is. You can just be, and you can breathe, and you can notice how that sense of support and ease impacts you, impacts your physical and your mental state. And again, generally, chest opening helps to lift mood and reduce depression. And so again, you can see this different kind of support here in fish pose. This is one of my favorite poses, and if you have a beautiful waterfront to do that on, that's great, or your rug on your living room floor, wherever you might be. Again, you can have these different ways of propping it. You can see how the chest is open, the lungs are open. We're increasing that space for the breath. And again, you might try these different poses and see how they make you feel. So getting toward the conclusion here, to remember that change is always possible. If we find ourselves getting stuck into these patterns, whatever these patterns might be, that it is always possible to change these patterns, and even just little tiny incremental changes might be the best changes. So you don't need to go and completely remake your life. And in fact, that complete remake of your life can actually be a very stressful thing that then again kicks in that nervous system, that fight or flight response. Whereas if we do these more kind of gradual changes, we might find that we have more success and we are more in that rest and digest mode. So we can change patterns of physical movement, we can change our thought patterns, we can change our emotional patterns. Again, that incremental, sometimes not even noticeable change that adds up over time. We can know that change takes practice and commitment, and that practice is progress, and that there's no end goal here. We're never looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfection in pose, perfection in our thinking. It's really the process that is the goal, and yoga is a lifelong process, like so many things. So the last stress and anxiety buster that I offer here in this presentation is mantras. And in yoga, there's very specific mantras and specific meaning, and a lot of them are in the traditional language of yoga, Sanskrit. But I like to work in American studies, and I like to work in women's studies, and I like to make up my own mantras, which might be favorite quotes of yours or just words that you make up that help you to be kind to yourself. Words that might just kind of pop into your brain, words and phrases that give you reminders about things. I've used these consciously and unconsciously, particularly when I'm in a very kind of stressful situation. It can help to just kind of breathe, or breathe and move, or breathe and move and repeat a mantra in your head or out loud if you are by yourself or you don't mind people giving you funny looks. And so these are just some of the mantras that I've used. And so, for instance, a couple years ago when I was doing some pretty intense distance hiking, backpacking, and got blisters about 3 miles in, I did about like 60 miles or so or more, however many miles those were, I forgot, because I was just doing these mantras and this breathing and trying to just put one foot in front of the other. Every step was extremely painful, but once I kind of had different mantras going that took me with each step, I was really able to just kind of be in a different place and make it through that place of physical pain. Not a good idea. Don't recommend it. But what works for you? And so one that I recently developed, just my breath is my tool, my breath is my life. And you can think my breath is my tool with the inhale, my breath is my life with the exhale, for instance. Or I am strong, I am balanced, I am my own best thing, which is a line stolen from a Toni Morrison novel, beloved. I'm here in my body, in my mind. Sorry, I'm here in my body, in my mind. I'm here in my breath, in my body, for instance. And one that I like to do at the end of a meditation practice is just, I'm grateful for all that I am. I'm thankful for all that I have. I am humbled by all that I know. I'm grateful for the opportunity for more life, more love, more joy, more connection. I am. And you can put whatever you want on this list in the moment, for instance. Or be steady like mountains, flow like water, float above it all like air. Again, maybe these don't speak to you, and that's great. Make up your own mantras. So again, all of this just looking at some of those connections between the mind and the body and the brain, between breath and movement, and in these ways that we can start to impact change in physical patterns and thought patterns in ways that might really increase our happiness, decrease our stress, and a way to practice self-care, self-love, self-compassion. And you can check out more of my resources, for instance, via my website or my Facebook group or my YouTube channel, or feel free to email me at sarah.hinges@maine.edu if you have any questions. So I hope that you found some of this information to be helpful. I definitely recommend that Bo Forbes book and the other resources that I mentioned in this PowerPoint as well. So thanks for listening, and keep on breathing.